You were introduced to Muhammad Abdullah briefly. Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, according to British documentation, was considered the fiercest adversary of the British Empire for 2 decades. Similar to many anti-colonial leaders in history, Sayyid Mohammed Abdullah Hassan elicited divided opinions. To many Somalis today, he is seen as a bold resistance figure, a devout Islamic scholar, a poet, and a powerful voice for nationalism. But to the British colonial rulers, who dominated much of the Horn of Africa. In the early 20th century, he was mockingly labeled the Mad Mullah. He commanded an army of Somali dervishes, devout Sufi Muslims, engaged in a relentless 20-year battle against colonial British, Italian, and Ethiopian powers. His great-granddaughter Tufaha now walks a similar path, attempting to uncover the full story behind this extraordinary life. For over 100 years, researchers have been reconstructing Hassan's narrative, and their work continues. Somali historian Ojama Said Isa compiled both oral accounts and documents from surviving Dervish veterans, preserving many of Hassan's fervently patriotic poems. Upon Hassan's death in 1920, the colonial British, after investing 20 years in trying to subdue him, sought to erase that heritage. For Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, most accounts agree that Sayyid Hassan's birth occurred in 1856 in the Samadikh Valley, near what is now the Somali-Ethiopian frontier. However, some sources suggest Kirit, located in northern Somalia, as his birthplace. Regardless of the exact location, he was raised in an area known as British Somaliland, a colonial protectorate established in 1884 and lasting until 1960. Sayyid Hassan was a devoted member of the Salihiyya Sufi Brotherhood. Islam dominated the region's spiritual life, as it still does today. Hassan wielded religious authority to unite Somalis against foreign occupation, presenting the resistance as a divinely ordained struggle to defend Islam and Somali self-rule. In response, British authorities escalated by deploying Christian missionaries, a move Hassan perceived as a direct challenge to Islamic traditions. Before the Mad Mullah, the Somali people existed in an imperial context, their territory partitioned between the French, British, Italians, and even the Ethiopians in the Ogaden region. This was the fractured landscape Sayyid Hassan inherited. Somalis, caught in the crossfire, were a decentralized society, lacking any singular ruler until the mid-19th century. There were elders, sheikhs, and local authorities, but no centralized monarchy for the Somali people. Sayyid Hassan's political and spiritual awakening likely began in 1884, the year he journeyed to Mecca to perform the Hajj pilgrimage. There, he encountered the Salihiyya order, a rising reformist movement led by a Sudanese mystic named Sayyid Mohammed Saleh. He also met Muhammad al-Mahdi, a Sudanese religious and political figure known for leading an armed resistance against British rule in Sudan. This pilgrimage profoundly impacted Hassan, deepening his awareness of anti-colonial struggles across the Muslim world. Returning via Aden in Yemen, he came back to Somalia with a bold mission to resist European colonization in every form, British, Italian, and Ethiopian alike. The Mad Mullah. Transformed spiritually, Hassan returned to his homeland, determined to spread the teachings of the Salihiyya. At the time, the Qadiriyya was the dominant Sufi order in Somalia, but Hassan believed their teachings lacked discipline and intensity. He embraced the ascetic Salihiyya style, donning a simple white sash and loincloth. The Dervish movement was born, a militant resistance force active in the early 20th century. Its leader, Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. Their mission, to liberate Somalia from British and Italian domination, to resist Ethiopian incursions, and to found an Islamic nation governed by religious principles. He journeyed back to his homeland, to the region of his maternal lineage, the Dulbahante territory near Bu Hudal. There, Hassan began to gather devoted supporters. Between 1897 and 1899, he spent 2 years establishing a strong and loyal base. Around this time, he sent a letter to the British authorities in Berbera. In it, he issued a stark ultimatum: withdraw your presence, or face an armed confrontation. This declaration marked the spark of the anti-colonial uprising. At the dawn of the 20th century, Britain's military forces were stretched thin, engaged in numerous conflicts across the globe: South Africa, Nigeria, Ireland, Afghanistan, Somalia, and most critically, the escalating tensions in Europe and the Middle East that would erupt into the First World War. In British Somaliland, Muhammad Abdullah Hassan used poetry to commemorate his battles against the colonial regime. The Dervish War began in 1899 and persisted for 21 grueling years. On one side, Hassan and his 20,000 Dervish fighters. On the other, British troops supported by the Kingdom of Italy and the Ethiopian Empire. Some say the revolt was provoked by Christian missionaries who adopted Somali children and baptized them into Christianity. Horrified, Hassan accused the British in writing, "The British have destroyed our religion and turned our children into theirs." Tensions exploded in early June 1901 near the southern town of Lasanod, then a strategic base for British military operations. On June 3rd, the fighting intensified. Despite lacking the firepower of the British forces, the Dervish warriors fought with relentless courage. In a surprising turn, the British were forced to retreat, a humiliating defeat. The mullah, Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, was quickly recognized by the British, Italians, and Ethiopian authorities as a serious religious and political figure. After his return from Mecca in the 1890s, Hassan launched his jihad, not only against the British, but against the Christian-led Ethiopian Empire and the Italian colonial regime as well. It was during 1901 that his threat became undeniable. His forces dealt a major blow to a British expedition. Eager for revenge, the British mounted another offensive just weeks later. They targeted a known Dervish stronghold, but the Dervishes were prepared. They set a calculated ambush. The skirmish escalated into savage close-quarters combat. For the second time in a month, British troops were overwhelmed and forced to flee. Among the captured spoils, a cache of British rifles seized by Hassan's fighters. News of these events spread rapidly. British and American newspapers continued referring to him by the slur "Mad Mullah," often refusing to print his actual name. Instead, headlines recounted his daring military feats. With growing anxiety, the New York Times covered him. So did the Times of London. He was no longer a fringe threat, but a serious, cunning, and elusive opponent. By now, the British had realized that Muhammad Abdullah Hassan was no ordinary foe. He had succeeded in rallying Somalis and waging an effective guerrilla war against one of the world's most formidable empires. Despite their numerical and technological superiority, The British, along with their Ethiopian and Italian allies, struggled to gain any lasting upper hand. Hassan's Dervish forces remained elusive. Their intimate knowledge of the rugged terrain gave them the advantage. Logistical difficulties only compounded the British dilemma. Even as the British attempted to forge alliances with rival Somali clans and strengthen coordination with their colonial partners, the Dervishes consistently anticipated their moves. They were always one step ahead. For the Dervish movement, the colonial enemies were not just the British. The Italians and Ethiopians were equally viewed as imperial aggressors. This view is crucial. From the Dervish perspective, Ethiopia was no less a colonial oppressor than its European counterparts. This laid the foundation for a broader vision, a pan-Somali alliance that transcended clan divisions, a unified front, for Max. The war between the Somali Dervish warriors and the European colonial armies was never a level playing field. The British and Italians were armed with advanced weapons and strategic doctrines, refined through years of colonial conquest. But the Dervishes held a different set of advantages. They were agile, operating like insurgents. They relied on speed, ambushes, and deep familiarity with the arid, unforgiving terrain of the Horn of Africa. Motivated by religious zeal and nationalist fervor, they fought with conviction that no army could replicate. During this early phase of the Dervish campaign, many battles were brutal, bloody encounters with devastating losses on both sides. Each Dervish victory further elevated Sayyid Hassan's legend. He became not only a spiritual and political leader, but a symbol of invincibility. Frustrated, the British formally declared war on the Dervishes. They referred to them as rebels of the empire. In British eyes, Hassan's refusal to submit to the king's authority was proof of his so-called madness. There were at least 4, possibly 5, major British expeditions launched against him. All of them failed. Each defeat added to Hassan's stature, within Somalia and beyond. In the African context, his record of resistance was virtually unmatched. He had humiliated the world's most powerful empire again and again. For the Somali people, he became an enduring icon, a poet, a warrior, a spiritual guide. For the British, he became a vexing enigma, a man who could not be broken. Sayyid Mohammed Abdullah Hassan led a 20-year jihad against British, Italian, and Ethiopian powers, unshaken and defiant until the very end. Even as foreign newspapers mocked him as the Mad Mullah, they could not ignore his battlefield brilliance. Meanwhile, his great-granddaughter Tufaha began her journey of rediscovery. She traveled back to Somalia to reconnect with the legacy of her ancestor. "I feel so excited," she said. "This is my first visit. I always dreamed of coming here, to visit the base, to learn more about him." Her voice trembled with emotion. "I want to read more, to meet people who were alive back then." Mixed feelings, excitement and sorrow, washed over her. "It feels like I'm meeting my grandfather," she reflected. "I feel like I'm going back to my roots." Sayyid Hassan's path on the battlefield was marked by both triumphs and setbacks. In June 1903, he penned a bold, open letter addressed to the British colonial authorities in Somalia. "Listen closely to my words. For 2 years I have waged war against you, in defense of my religion and my homeland. If peace is truly your intention, then abandon our land and return to yours. Defeating us will win you nothing. No lush fields, no orchards, no wealth. This land holds no gold or silver, only open plains, dry pasture, and livestock. Its sands will scorch you under the brutal sun. If you kill us, we will die as martyrs destined for paradise. But if we kill you, you will descend into the flames of hell. If you choose war, so be it. But don't dare blame anyone but yourselves." This declaration reflected the unwavering spirit of the Dervish leader. It also underscored his skillful use of rhetoric to portray the conflict as not just political, but spiritual. Following years of resistance, by 1904 or 1905, the British, unable to crush Hassan militarily, proposed a new path forward. They extended a treaty offer, relocation in exchange for peace. The Italians, acting as mediators, invited Hassan to move his forces into the part of Somalia under their control. In return, the British and Ethiopians would cease hostilities. Hassan accepted. He agreed to the relocation. This led to a fragile truce. The 1904 peace accord, formally signed in 1905 as the Ilig Treaty, granted the Dervishes control over part of the Nugal Valley in northern Somalia. It wasn't independence, but it gave the Dervishes room to regroup. They designated the port town of Ilig, as their capital and began fortifying their presence there. From this new base, they prepared for the next chapter in their resistance movement. Somalia today bears few visible remnants of that historical era. But among the sparse surviving structures, the forts of Ail, Mudug, and Gambar, near Lasanod, stand as architectural echoes of the Dervish era. Traveling across northern Somalia, only a handful of historical buildings remain, and many of those are Dervish-built. In the area surrounding the fort at Ail, armed guards and visible tension remain. This proximity to modern conflict zones illustrates that the scars of colonial warfare are still very much present. Tufaha and her team approach the fortress with reverence, eager to uncover more of the story encased in its weathered walls. This was not merely a building. It was a symbol, a sanctuary, a military headquarters, a political statement. The fragile truce between the Dervishes and the colonial powers held for 4 years, until 1909. But peace was never complete. Skirmishes continued sporadically. In 1909, Hassan shifted his capital once again, this time to Taleh in the Sul region of northern Somalia. Here he built a powerful stronghold consisting of 4 heavily fortified stone structures. Al-Silo, the main military center, capable of housing 2,000 troops and 5,000 livestock. Al-Filat, Hassan's private residence. Dar Ilalo, a watchtower for surveillance and defense. Dawad, a diplomatic guest house used to host foreign emissaries, including visitors from the Ottoman Empire. These defenses turned Taleh into a nearly impenetrable fortress, a launchpad for future resistance efforts, and a haven for the Dervish vision of sovereignty underpinned by Islamic governance. In the broader landscape of the British Empire around 1909, a pivotal figure was shaping policy: Winston Churchill. At the time, Churchill was a key official, deeply involved in decisions regarding British Somaliland. He declared that Britain would pull back, acknowledging Hassan's effective control over the Somali interior. The British, recognizing the futility of endless conflict, chose to withdraw, allowing Hassan to hold the land, while they retained a presence along the coast. After the Dervishes entrenched themselves at Taleh, relative calm followed, punctuated by occasional outbreaks of violence. Then, in 1913, tensions surged once again. A significant incident occurred one that would mark a turning point in the resistance. Colonel Richard Corfield, commander of the 110-man Somali Camel Constabulary, led a campaign against a Dervish contingent. On August 9th, the two forces clashed at Dul Madube. The result was devastating for the British. Grim Corfield was killed in battle, along with 35 of his soldiers. 17 were gravely injured, and 24 deserted. The loss was not only strategic, it was symbolic. Hassan composed a poem to commemorate the victory, enshrining the moment in verse. But no sooner had the dervishes celebrated than global politics began to shift. Shortly after the Battle of Dul Madube, Europe erupted into war. World War I broke out, and Britain shifted its military priorities to the European front. The British largely retreated from internal Somali affairs. They maintained a coastal hold, but their focus was now on Germany and the Western Front. British forces in Somaliland were redeployed to fight in Europe. This retreat gave the dervishes breathing space. They remained entrenched at Taleh, protected by their fortified base and strengthened by the morale of recent victories. But the lull was temporary. After the war, the question resurfaced: how to end Hassan's resistance once and for all. In a military dispatch dated April 30th, 1920, British colonial officials outlined a new strategy. Conventional methods, infantry and mounted camel troops, had failed. Now they would introduce a devastating new weapon. Ominous, the Royal Air Force. When World War I concluded, Winston Churchill returned, this time as Secretary of State for the colonies. He endorsed a radical new tactic: aerial bombardment. On the morning of January 21st, 1920, RAF planes took off from their base near Lasanod and began bombing Dervish targets. Shocked, civilians were caught in the assault. Eyewitnesses recall the trauma. My family had 11 people, 9 children and 2 parents. Both my great-grandfather Rahar Bilal and great-grandmother Ugazo, sorrowful, died in those attacks. The raids shattered communities. The survivors, including many from the elite Dulbahante Dervish units, lost entire family lines. They destroyed our future. My people were defending their homeland. They weren't invading anyone else's territory. Tufaha, standing at the site of these bombings, described feeling overwhelmed. I feel connected, like I belong here, but I also feel sorrow. This place was obliterated by bombs. She added, he wasn't a mad mullah. Indignant, they were the mad ones. He was protecting his land. They were the invaders. Ultimately, it was British air power that broke the Dervish resistance. The man responsible for overseeing the campaign was Sir Geoffrey Francis Archer, governor of British Somaliland. He reported to London, "The final phase is upon us. Hassan's forces are weakening. We've secured tribal alliances. Measured small operations will now finish the job." He closed the dispatch with, "It is an honor to serve. Sincerely, Governor G.F. Archer." But the war was not over just yet. Though battered by the Royal Air Force and pursued by colonial troops, Muhammad Abdullah Hassan was not captured. He escaped. The British declared victory, but in reality, their most elusive enemy had vanished into the desert. A wave of anxiety swept through British officials. For 20 years, Hassan had defied them, and now, despite their most aggressive campaign, he had once again slipped away. Where was he? What would he do next? The answer was less dramatic than they feared, softly but far more tragic. Hassan fled to the Ogaden region, a territory that now lies within modern-day Ethiopia. There, weakened and in hiding, weakly, he fell ill with influenza. After 6 days of illness, he died. His death marked the definitive end of the Dervish resistance. Without their spiritual and military leader, the movement dissolved. Its members scattered across Somali territories, some blending back into clan society, others fading into obscurity. And the man who had fought 3 empires for 2 decades, he was buried in secret. One of the men who helped carry his body later recalled the moment. "We dug a grave and buried him without letting anyone see. Then we dug another grave, and another, and another." Why? To confuse anyone who might come looking, to ensure that the British would never find his true resting place. The story of Sayyid Mohammed Abdullah Hassan ended in the most human of ways, not with a battlefield defeat, but with illness. A man who had stood against the British, the Italians, and the Ethiopians, who had built fortresses, led armies, and outwitted generals, was undone by disease. There's a cruel irony to it. He had outlasted the most powerful empire on earth, only to fall to a virus. And yet, in some sense, resolute, he still won. Because even in death, his legacy could not be silenced. 40 years after the British air raids ended the Dervish resistance, Somalia finally gained independence in the year 1960. But the dream Muhammad Abdullah Hassan fought for remained fragile. Since gaining sovereignty, the Somali government in Mogadishu has often struggled to assert consistent authority throughout the entire country. The vision Hassan once held, a unified, independent Somali nation, only materialized long after his death, and even then, it remained incomplete. Still, he is remembered as a revolutionary, a poet, a fighter for his faith and his people. Despite the colonial attempts to erase him, Hassan became a symbol. In the 1970s, a statue was raised in his honor in the capital city of Mogadishu. It stood tall, a tribute to the man who resisted empires. But like the nation itself, the monument faced its own turmoil. 20 years later, the statue was torn down during Somalia's internal conflicts. Years passed, the country endured, and so did his story. In 2019, the statue was restored, unveiled once again by the Somali president, Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, a renewed symbol for a new generation, a public affirmation that Hassan's legacy still held meaning, not just in history books, but in the streets of Somalia. His life, his struggle, his defiance of colonialism, these became part of the national memory. Reflective, an enduring legacy, etched in both poetry and stone.
For more history of the world, please subscribe the channel.